his first Principles Initiative. He authored the 2009 bestseller, We Still Hold These Truths, Rediscovering Our Principles, Reclaiming Our Future. Thank you. Next, we have the Honorable Ken Blackwell, Ohio Zone. His public service includes terms as Mayor of Cincinnati, as Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. In 1994, he became the first African American elected to a statewide executive office in Ohio, where he was the elected Treasurer of State. He subsequently was elected to 2 terms as Secretary of State. Our next panelist is the Honorable Edwin Meese. He holds Ronald Reagan Chair in Public Policy at the Heritage Foundation. He is also the Chairman Emeritus of Heritage Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, and is also a Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, California. Mr. Meese served as the 75th Attorney General of the United States from February 1985 to August of 1988. He is a retired colonel in the Army Reserve. Next, we have Stan Evans, who is a veteran journalist and author. He previously was the editor of the Indianapolis News. He was a columnist for the Los Angeles Times Syndicate, a commentator for CBS and Voice of America, as well as the former chairman of the ACU. He is the author or co-author of 9 books. Finally on our panel, we have Bruce Fein, who is an internationally renowned constitutional attorney, scholar, writer, and columnist. He served as a visiting scholar for constitutional studies at Heritage Foundation and at the American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Fein regularly appears on national media and is a frequent expert witness in congressional hearings. Now let's give a very loud and warm CPAC welcome to our next panel.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I just want to clarify that the discussion of second principles will be down the hall, and we'll be discussing third and fourth principles in the bar later. And this is a discussion of first principles. It was back leading up to the election of 2008 that we at Heritage had the idea that there was something brewing that needed to be responded to, and we wanted to establish an initiative to orient America as much as we could back to its founding ideas, to restore a sense of what Jefferson called an expression of the American mind, by which he meant a deep understanding of the core principles of the Declaration and the Constitution, but in very general terms, in terms of a citizen. And that's what we wanted to do. And for that initiative, we chose to use the term first principles, which is now broadly used. We chose the term, and the term is used by the founders themselves, hence our use of it. During the period after the Declaration of Independence, the success of the Revolution, during the Confederation period, when Washington and others were receiving letters with great rapidity, arguing that indeed the American Revolution had failed, and the American experiment turned out to be one that was incapable of working. But several of the founders, Madison, Washington himself, said it is time, in times like these, when we are threatened with the demise of our republic, that we must return to our first principles. We must revert to our first principles. That's the sense in which we mean it today. Not that we want to go back to the 18th century, but that we want to revert to those ideas as a way to reorient our country, to repoint it to its North Star, to give it a compass, to guide it out to the problems we face today. So we want to go back to those revolutionary principles: liberty, equality, rightly understood, nature, grounding for moral ideas, consent, principles of the Declaration, but of course those principles secured in the great framework of the United States Constitution. The rule of law, written constitutionalism. The structure of constitutionalism, things like the separation of powers, the idea that there are coordinate branches that have particular powers. Federalism, the idea that we are not a centralized national government. The themes of limited government. Now, all of those, of course, pointing to the grand theme of America, self-government. Here, as Hamilton once said, here we govern ourselves. Free enterprise, character-forming institutions shaping ourselves and our families and our lives. independence in the world. These are the ideas that gave rise to the American dream, the real American dream, one about opportunity and upward mobility that attracts so many to our shores. And these are ideas that truly make America exceptional. And those ideas, of course, came under grave attack with the rise of progressivism at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. When American intellectuals did what they often do, they went to Europe looking for better ideas. And they brought them back and revived and built a new argument, which they called for the creation of a new republic, about evolving rights, about all things that change, and about living constitutions. That gave rise to a different dream, one that we're seeing played out today in the modern liberal state, one that vastly overspins and centralized control in Washington and is devastating for massive numbers of Americans, especially those who are most in need of the services and help of civil society. First Principles has had a comeback, fortunately, having roots in the conservative movement itself, going back to names like Elihu Root and William Howard Taft, and especially someone named Calvin Coolidge, in my opinion, one of the greatest presidents of the 20th century. Second only to Ronald Reagan, of course, Mr. Meese. But also the conservative movement itself. Russell Kirk wrote about the roots of American order. Hayek wrote a book called The Constitution of Liberty. The Road to Serfdom is a great attack on a modern administrative state. And then there was a rising group of scholars in the 60s and 70s that pushed back against Beard's thesis of the Constitution, and that established a conservative argument about America in its defense, but also as the root of our liberties. We see that burst onto the political field. It was late prior to that, but really burst into the field in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. Just read his first inaugural, the one who talks about, in which he talks about us building a conservative movement and conservative ideas on the shoulders of our founders. And of course, it came into life in a very particular way when Ronald Reagan's Attorney General decided to pick a fight over the meaning of the Constitution with then sitting justices of the United States Supreme Court. And then, of course, it has had renewed emphasis lately. One of the most important things for the First Principles movement in America has been none other than Barack Obama. His attack on America, his attempt to redefine it and transform it, gave rise to that great Tea Party movement. Who would have thought that Americans in great numbers would go around having conventions and demonstrations, flaving Gadsden flags and waving a pocket constitution? And that leads us to where we are today. A debate over what America means. American politics is always historically a debate over that thing. What do those principles mean today, and how does it play out in our politics? Barack Obama has an idea. He clearly wants to claim it for himself. Read his second inaugural, the one that starts by quoting the Constitution. But it's clearly a progressive argument, because all things change in his idea. First Principles are more important than ever. They must be argued in the square to prevent the liberal claim on those ideas. We must defend them. They are also, in my opinion, the greatest source of conservative fusion, not just about coexistence, but a deeper grounding in ideas. They provide a ground for our arguments, both philosophically and in a constitutional framework, and I believe they're a ground for modern arguments about policies such as opportunity, social mobility, and reform that can guide us in the future. These ideas, the past, the First Principles, where it comes from, where they are today in the debate in modern American politics, and where we're going with those ideas and how they might shape American politics and conservatism, is what we want to talk about today. And for that, we have a very good panel of distinguished thinkers, all friends, who are, all in their own ways, deeply expert not only on First Principles and American constitutionalism, but American politics itself. We're actually going to go in alphabetical order, among other reasons, so that Ed Meese can be our wrap-up speaker to our delight. And first kick off with Ken Blackwell, who has already been briefly introduced, coming up as the mayor of Cincinnati, up to and through that and serving government office going back to be treasurer, and of course 2 terms as Secretary of State, and my choice for governor of that great state. Ken, thank you.
Thanks very much. I come from a family of extremes. I have folks who are long in oratory and others who have mastered the short quip. My Uncle Albert used to say that doomsday is that day that we get all of the government that we pay for. And it sort of sums up what the challenge of the American experience has been since we broke with the monarchy in Great Britain. Ladies and gentlemen, since Aristotle's recordings and observations, we have been taken with the conflict between the state and the individual, between individual liberty and the organized power of the state, between the reduction of the individual's moral responsibility and the absolute power of the state. The growth of the welfare state has provided us with 4 wrong ideas, and 4 threats to our first principles. The first is that the government can run the economy better than markets and individual decisions. The second is that government workers and professionals can make better decisions for your family than you. The third is that the work ethic is old and antiquated. This is a cultural phenomenon. We are rapidly becoming a culture where earning money doesn't entitle you to it, but wanting money does. That is a fundamental cultural threat to our first principles. And the fourth is moral relativism. If we go to the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it starts, we hold these truths to be self-evident. My Uncle Albert used to say, that's a simple way of saying any knucklehead should be able to get this. That all of us are created equal. We're not all equal in size, we're not all equal in weight, we are not all equal in intelligence, we're not all equal in income. We're equal in that we're all accountable to our God, and we're equal in God's investment of human dignity in us. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, which means that our human rights, our basic rights, are not grants from government, but they're gifts from God. Given to us in a particular order, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is very difficult to enjoy liberty if you're dead. And in the limited powers of government, one of those powers is to protect innocent life. It is very difficult to enjoy or to pursue happiness if you're not free. That sums up the challenge when coupled with the 4 wrong-headed notions. I remember, General, I was at a small university in Ohio and I had gone to speak. Before I got on the podium, I had gone to the restroom, and scribbled there in the men's room was, God is dead, Nietzsche. I got back there within 18 months, that was scratched out and it said, Nietzsche is dead, God. That is the struggle over first principles, because we have a president that wants to transform our market economy into a government-controlled economy. He wants to transform our family-centered society into a government-centered society. Most importantly, he wants to transform our national philosophy founded upon the primacy of the individual and the supremacy of God, to one founded upon the primacy of the collective good and the supremacy of the central government. Mr. Obama's problem is that the Constitution of the United States stands in his way. The framers of the Constitution drew these words and these concepts together, understanding that they were erecting a wall designed to stop any president from fundamentally transforming our country. As we talk about first principles, I want to just sum up my opening remarks by saying I had a great uncle who was the first African American to win an Olympic gold medal. He did it in the 1924 Games in Paris. He had qualified to run the 100 against Eric Liddell, the high hurdles, and the long jump. When he got to Paris, he was told that he couldn't run the 100-yard dash or the high hurdles because they were for white-only events. He, in fact, didn't run because of that ignorance. Liddell didn't run because the finals fell on a Sabbath, and he chose fidelity to faith. When my uncle came back to Cincinnati, he told my mom's generation that God had put him in a place where he would know just how important, much more important than the gold medal, fidelity to faith is. Ladies and gentlemen, the moral foundation that champions the responsibility of the individual, the primacy of God, and leads us to put a choke, a harness on the growth and expansion and intrusion of government in our lives is what the first principles are all about. The issue is whether we will take a stand and fight from the Atlantic to the Pacific, or whether we will tuck our tails and run and blow out the candles of hope. Thank you.
I am very pleased to announce that reports of the demise of Stanton Evans were premature. He's actually with us today, and I'm very happy about that. Stan is described in his biography as a journalist. That, of course, is an understatement, shall we say. He has deep and powerful roots in American conservatism, going back to being assistant editor to the Freeman, who's worked at Human Events, and being associate editor at National Review for 13 years. He was the first chairman of the American Conservative Union. In 1977, he had founded the National Journalism Center. He is an important figure in conservatism, and in that time he's also written 8 books. His most recent, I would like to mention, Stalin's Secret Agents, The Subversion of Roosevelt's Government. I'm pleased to introduce Stanton Evans.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank all of you. It's an honor to be on this great panel with people I've admired for years and to be with you. I'm not going to go back to the ultimate first principles, but I'm going to talk about some political first principles that I think are important in the present day. And the first thing to confront, and Ken referred to this in his very eloquent remarks, is what we're up against right now. And I don't know about you, I get most of my news from the Jimmy Kimmel show. And a week ago tonight, Jimmy Kimmel, are we all aware of Jimmy Kimmel, more or less? And are we aware of the sequester? Does everybody know about the sequester, you know, the 1% cut that will shut down civilization? Anyway, Jimmy Kimmel sent an inquiring reporter the streets of New York to interview typical voters on those streets about the sequester. And I'm guessing from the way the interviews went that most of these voters were Obama voters. And the question, initial question was this to these citizens of New York: do you agree with President Obama's decision to pardon the sequester and send it to Portugal? The consensus seemed to be that this was a good decision. The first respondent said that she did agree with the decision because Portugal has a constitutional right to that protection. I guess that's in the Portuguese constitution. I don't know how that affects us, but that's what she said. There was one respondent who was a little shaky. He kind of supported the decision to pardon the sequester and send it to Portugal, but he said, I think we should have those jobs over here. The final question, the modulation of this was a slight change in the question, which was, what do you think of the fact that North Korea is developing its own sequester? So I didn't look at an Obama question, just a general information question. And the answer to that was very scary. It was scary. So these, I would remind you, are voters. Any three of you, your votes are counted by these three people that are obviously a part of the Obama base. There is